Hello guys and welcome back to another video. Today we will cover a game from round 1 of the Sinquefield Cup in St. Louis, and this is a game between Magnus Carlsen and Nepomniachtchi. It was a very interesting and also instructive game, so let's see what happened. Magnus is playing with white and he starts with g4, knight to f6, c4, e6, knight to f3, and Nepomniachtchi goes d5 playing the queen's gambit declined, c capture on d5, and e capture on d5. Magnus goes knight to c3, and now c6 solidifying the center. Bishop to f4, bishop to f5, e3, knight on b to d7, and here Magnus comes up with a very interesting idea and he goes h3. And here white obviously intends to play g4, and maybe if the bishop goes back to g6, then you have the option to go knight to h4 and try to capture this bishop. Nepomniachtchi goes bishop to e7, and now g4, bishop to e4, and now bishop to e2. Here I should mention that you have the option to capture this bishop, and of course here if black recaptures with the pawn, then after knight to d2, the pawn here will be very weak and white can try to win the pawn with moves like bishop to g2 and also queen to c2. And of course here white is slightly better. But the problem here is that after knight capture on e4, black will recaptures with his knight, keeping his pawn structure intact, and white here simply didn't manage to achieve that much. So instead here Magnus goes bishop to e2, and now queen to b6, going after the b2 pawn. Magnus offers a queen trade, queen to b3, queen capture on b3, and a capture on b3. And here we reach a position when white has doubled pawns, but also he has an open file. And if white manages to play moves like b4 and b5 and exchange his pawn with c6 pawn, white's position will simply be much better. Nepo here goes bishop back to g6, and now knight to h4. Bishop to b4, pinning the knight, and now knight capture on g6. H capture on g6, and now f3. White intends to put his king on f2, and now black goes knight to f8, intending to reroute back to e6 and attack the bishop on f4. King to f2, knight to e6, and bishop to g3. King to e7, and now Magnus goes h4, trying to grab as much space as possible on the king side. Nepo goes a6, and now king to g2. And the point of this move is that white wants to put his bishop on f2 in order to guard the e3 weakness. Rook on a to d8. Black here is intending to drop his bishop back to d6 and offer an exchange of bishops. And Magnus here simply goes bishop back to f2, bishop to d6, and bishop to d3. And here Nepo makes his first inaccuracy of the game, he goes bishop back to b8. And the point here is that this bishop was guarding the c5 square, and now white has this move knight to a4. White is intending to put his knight on c5 and maybe support it with b4. And here Nepomniachtchi simply admits his mistakes and he goes back with his bishop to d6. Bishop back to e1, supporting the b4 push. And black of course cannot allow this, and that's why he played c5 himself. Knight capture on c5, knight capture on c5, d capture on c5, and bishop capture on c5. The e3 pawn is attacked and Magnus simply played bishop to d2. Rook on h to e8, adding more pressure on the e3 pawn. And now b4, bishop back to b6, and b5. And here already black's position is worse. Of course you do not want to capture the pawn, because after bishop capture on b5, the rook is hit, and you have to move your rook, and then bishop to b4 will come, and black's position is much worse here. So here simply Nepomniachtchi decides to give up a pawn, and he played a5. Bishop capture on a5, bishop capture on a5, and rook capture on a5. And here we reach a position when white is up a pawn, but it's not the most impressive pawn. It's a doubled pawn on the b5, and also white doesn't have the bishop pair anymore, which gives black some chances to draw the game. Nepomniachtchi here goes king to d6, opening the attack against the e3 pawn, and now king to f2. Rook to e7, intending to double up on the e file, and then rook to d1. White here is indirectly attacking the d5 pawn, and also he has ideas of playing b6, and maybe bishop to b1 or bishop to c4, and try to go after the d5 pawn, which is very weak. Black here needs to find some way to create some counterplay, and that's why Nepomniachtchi played rook to h8, g5 by Magnus, king to d7, and now rook to a4, defending the h4 pawn. Knight to c5, hitting the rook, and the rook to g4. And here black must definitely take this bishop. Of course, after rook captures, the d5 pawn is still weak, but black can play rook to d7 and king to e6 and try to defend passively. Instead in the game here, Nepomniachtchi played king back to c7, which was a terrible mistake, because now after bishop to b1, the bishop will go to a2 to add more pressure on the pawn, and you simply cannot defend the d5 pawn anymore. Black here tried rook to e5, and now bishop to a2. f6, g capture on f6, g capture on f6, and rook capture on d5. Rook capture on d5, and the bishop capture on d5. Knight to d3 check, king to g3, knight to e5 hitting the rook, rook to f4, and now rook to d8 attacking the bishop. And here Magnus calmly goes b6 check, and it was in this position where Nepomniachtchi resigned, because here if you try to capture the pawn, after rook capture on f6, king to c5, and now simply e4, and your position is simply hopeless. White will go f4, kick the knight, and then this pawn will drop, and white will be at least 3 pawns up, and he has a completely winning position. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Please, if you're not already subscribed to my channel, hit that subscribe button and also turn on the notification bell to get our latest videos. Thank you guys for watching, and see you in the next video.